How are you?
I am good, thank you.
Yeah, and you're based in New Zealand?
I am currently stuck, yes, in New Zealand.
Why would you say that? You wanted to travel somewhere?
I last year I spent 189 days on the road, and yeah, I love splitting my time between Europe and sort of the Asia Pacific. And so, yeah, I have not been able to travel all year, obviously, and so I feel a little trapped.
Yeah, and how's that working for you?
Well, I haven't murdered anybody yet, but there's been times where I've said to my husband, I just need to get out of here. No, it's okay. It's just a different, when you're on the road all the time, as an entrepreneur, your life is always moving fast. It's really interesting to suddenly not be anywhere and just staying still. Yeah, I've had to learn to deal with it.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned like you had to travel quite a bit in the past, and if you compare that to your own situation now and maybe in line with your entrepreneurship journey, how do you see your
Yeah.
journey now?
Well, I'm like a bird in a cage trying to like open the door and just yeah, I feel a bit yeah, I'm having to learn with it. It's not in my nature or my personality, but I'm having to learn that this is what we've got, and therefore I'm just going to have to figure out how to adapt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, we are all trying to, or pretending, or at least, doing whatever it takes to go back into the new normal.
Yeah.
Here, we are based in Belgium, and we are
Yeah.
also trying to do the same, so.
Yeah. Yeah. The problem with New Zealand is that if I leave, I can't come back. So I can't leave. That's why I feel so trapped, because usually, I would spend this summer in Europe. I usually do summer to summer. So summer in New Zealand, then summer in Europe. And so 50-50, I'm here in Europe. And yeah, I can't. This is my first winter in New Zealand ever. It's colder than I thought it would be. Um, and I keep wanting to leave, but then I'm like, I won't be able to get back in because we have such a strict quarantine system and it's very complicated. So yeah, I'd like to go anywhere warm and sunny right now.
Here as well, it's not that warm. It's still manageable, but I think
Hmm.
it's getting towards the end of the summer. So still we're
Yeah.
having fun, a little bit of fun.
Yeah. It looks good. It looks good. My family all live in the UK, so they keep sending me pictures of how nice it looks.
Every other day it rains, just to let you know.
Okay, thanks. You're making me feel better. That's good.
But next week it's going to be 27, so I'm just looking
Oh
forward.
yeah. Okay, now I'm not listening. Now I'm leaving you be.
I would like to start from your background. Like, you have
Sure.
your background in engineering, and
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, okay, with this sort of background, a strong background in engineering and so forth, you've chosen a entrepreneurship journey. So, what was the problem that you were trying to solve?
Yeah, so look, I'm an engineer by training. I have a PhD in nanotechnology. And there are two things that are unusual. One is that I'm a woman, and there weren't many women doing engineering back in the day when I was. And number two, I actually failed high school. And so I dropped out of high school because lots of reasons. Didn't have much money, didn't have much education. My parents didn't weren't educated, and so didn't know how to teach me. And so I got into engineering by chance and much later in life than most people would. And so I think I started differently, which meant that when I went into engineering with a very different mindset than perhaps other students would. And then became a real engineer and got to live in Silicon Valley and consult for some big high-tech companies like Apple and Intel and Microsoft and IBM, and got to be around very entrepreneurial innovators, and really got to see how quickly technology could be invented and technology could be created, but also got to see how little diversity there was in the people that were creating it. And when you see things being invented around you by the same type of people, you see the same types of things be invented. And I think I just got really frustrated going, oh, but the world has so many big issues, and the people inventing the technology don't seem to be as connected to some of the big issues that I was interested in, which was, making sure that people had fresh water and electricity and, the basics. And so became an engineer, saw that, got frustrated, decided I'd make a difference by becoming an academic. So moved to New Zealand, became a professor of engineering, thought that would fix it, realized it wasn't going to fix it because there still weren't many women studying engineering. And so as much as I wanted to be the educator to discuss this, actually there was very little diversity in my classroom. And so I thought, oh, I'm here. And the people I want to teach are still not very diverse. And so I'm not changing the system. So 4 years ago, quit academia and actually wanted to address, from an engineering perspective, the issues around diversity in engineering, and also how people who invent things actually become inventors. So we have lots of people who have great ideas, but very few of them actually are able to make those ideas happen. And I want to see more types of people, different types of people, be inventors of things.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a few different areas that were your interest, and also mentioned the diversity in engineering. Can you explain there a little bit in terms of what you meant by that, in diversity in engineering?
Yeah, so you tend to have to be quite privileged to enter engineering as a profession. And I say that because you tend to have to get very good grades in high school, which means that there's an advantage if you go to a better school. So if you're on a lower income or go to a poorer school, you tend not to then get the grades that you need to get into university, number one. And also, if you're from a lower income, you tend not to have the positive role models that might be chief engineers around you that you can see that trade is around. And so, socioeconomic status is one form of diversity that I'm interested in. And I'm passionate about that because I came from a low socioeconomic family. And so I didn't see many kids like me get into university, never mind to study engineering. Gender diversity is another one. I am a woman and there are fewer women, much fewer women who study, but also I'm mixed race. So I'm not white, I'm not Asian, I'm a blend of all of these wonderful things. But as a non, all of these things, which means I get to speak multiple languages and eat great food. But also it means that my perspectives on the world come from a person of multiple cultures. And I, again, tend not to see, some cultures represented in engineering. And I work a lot now in New Zealand with Indigenous people who are very connected to the land and how it works. And I don't see some of these ideas actually thought about in some of our big engineering firms.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And what is the what is Nano Girl doing?
Yeah, so here I am. I'm a professor. I have a real job. I have status, and I'm frustrated that my freshman year is always highly dominated by men, and also highly dominated from those from very privileged schools. And so I studied the system, and as a researcher, I went back and found out that actually children typically make up their mind about science by the age of 12. And so if I wanted to change what my freshman class looked like, I actually needed to go find some 8-year-olds and start there. And so I said, okay, this is from an engineering perspective, this is the beginning of the chain. So I need to go down here. So I called some primary schools and I said, hey, I'm a weird professor. I'd love to come and talk to your kids about engineering. And they were like, yeah, nobody visits us. Please come in. So I came in and I'm a professor of nanotechnology. So I'd come and talk about nanotechnology, and I talked to the kids about how it could give you superpowers. And I'd bring all these experiments in. I had a levitating superconductor so things could fly. I had a super hydrophobic coating so things would never get wet. And I'd say, look, if you become a nanotechnologist, you get these superpowers. You can actually invent your own, like Batman, right? And the kids are like, yeah, I want to be like Batman. And then they'd say, oh, if you developed your own superpowers, you need your own superhero name. I'm like, you're right. So they said, well, obviously you're Nano Girl because you do nanotech and you're female. And, they're 8-year-olds. I was like, yeah, that's a cool name if I was 8. So I had that. So it stuck. And then as I went to more and more schools, more and more kids were like, oh, it's Nano Girl. And I thought, I better trademark this because this is sticking. And so I kept the name because it really resonated with kids and helped them see themselves as superheroes and inventors of new technologies. And then, yeah, and I trademarked it. And then I realized, actually, this is what I want to do forever. I want to use the power of Nano Girl and that concept of being a superhero and inventing superpowers. I want to use that for good, and I want to use that to empower young people to actually realize that they're innovators and creators, and that they too can invent superpowers. So Nano Girl became a social enterprise that I started, which is all about empowering young people around the world to realize that they're pretty cool and they can invent some stuff.
Interesting the way you've taken a Nano Girl to the center stage.
It wasn't a plan. There was no plan. It was purely accidental. And the stage is interesting because what happened, I'm the type of person, if somebody says, hey, do you want to do this? Even if it's totally nuts, I say yes, because life is interesting when you have good stories. And so I was approached by an arts festival, and they said, hey, we've heard about your Nano Girl. Do you want to turn it into a stage show? And I'm like, yes. Like, I have never done stage shows. I don't even know what one is. They said, oh, we've got this guy. He knows how to make stage shows. We'll partner you with him. I was like, okay. And so this guy, Gareth Baston, they flew in from the UK. And we wrote this ridiculously funny science show for kids. And we were like, let's just perform it. And it was such a great concept. And now we call it Science Pantomime. That actually we decided to turn it into an actual show, and we wrote it properly the next year and had, a lot of stage shows, and it sold out. And we've been touring that show for 4 years, and it sells out every time. So yeah, it ended up becoming a show. Who knew a professor of engineering would end up doing theatre? It's very bizarre.
and then of course, like this is a different situation now. With the present situation, perhaps the whole show is brought to the digital format, I guess.
Yeah, so look, we've been touring Australasia, and we've done really well with the shows, and it got picked up globally. And so we were about to, in March this year, we were going to do our global tour. So we're taking the whole company on the road, starting in Australia, going to the Middle East, ending up in Europe, and would have been on the road for 6 months. Now that was going to work out to be about 1.5 million euro worth of bookings, which was, a significant portion of my company's income for the year. And we were all committed to being on the road. And then obviously this pandemic hit, and all of our business cancelled. All of the theatres were shutting down, everything cancelled pretty much on the same day. And we realized very quickly that the world as we knew it was different, but also the business that we had, which was live theatre and live performances, was pretty much dead. And so I realized that I have 12 full-time employees, and I have to be able to feed them. And I had no money coming into my business. So it was a pretty quick, what am I going to do now? And there's two choices, right? One is roll over and quit, and two is fight. And I'm a fighter. So I said, okay, well, the world is going to need education. Actually, education is going to be very different. And so what I want to do is take the concept of what we do in our theatre shows, which is bring science to life, make it lockdown friendly, and actually turn it into a digital product. And so I got my theatre team to build me a TV studio in our office. And I tried to remember how to code back from when I was, a teenager, and built it, which was very messy. And then once I built the foundations with some friends, I got actual coders to be like, can you just fix all of these broken bits? But and you have to build the basics first, because you don't really know what it needs to be until you've built it. So did that, and then basically recorded 50 different at-home science and engineering experiments that only involve lockdown products, so things that you would find at home in your cupboards, paper, pens, empty bottles, to help kids build superpowers. So it was called Nano Girl's Lab, and it was 50 different superpower experiments that you could build at home. And I actually built it for parents. I mean, keeping your kids busy during lockdown is important, and helping them to be inventors is important. But actually every experiment has a secret parent cheat sheet. So when your child watches the video, you know that they're building a rocket ship, for example, and it says, hey, your child is building a rocket ship today. Here are all the questions your children are going to ask you about rockets, and here are all the answers. So you don't need to Google rockets. Here's how you become the expert, because we know that a lot of parents aren't confident in science, and that's part of the challenge. So what we did was built something with an answer book for parents so that they didn't have to worry about it.
Interesting. Though I have 11-year-old, and she sometimes asks me. I mean, she's past that age, I guess, to
Hmm.
play a bit. But she sometimes asks me difficult questions, and I often say Google it. That's the easy way to get out
Yeah.
of that conversation. So I think it's interesting what you're doing as far as
The
giving the
problem when you say Google it is that your child doesn't know. I mean, Google will give you an answer for everything, right or wrong.
yes,
And
yeah.
what it doesn't teach you is critical thinking. And so what we do is we say, here's your parent cheat sheet. Here's what you need to do about rocket ships. But actually, if you want to find out more about rocket ships, here is how you assess information and where it comes from. So here is how you could probably trust a NASA website more than an I Love Space website, and
Mhm,
just giving that critical thinking, because those are the skills that your children need for life. Not just
mhm,
giving them the answer or saying, just use the internet. Because one of the
mhm,
challenges with the internet, and it's the lack of diversity problem, is that the internet is programmed by programmers, and they tend to all look alike very much in Silicon Valley. And if you look at how the algorithms are made around, artificial intelligence for Google Images, for example, actually what your child or your daughter is Googling has probably been put there by an algorithm that is by a white male.
mhm,
And so the biases, even within our technology, if we don't think about them, mean that the answers we're giving to our children to search for have an inherent bias around them.
mhm.
So yeah, I'm anti Google it, and I'm pro parents sit down together with your kids and go on an adventure and see what you can find.
No, I need to do that now in that case. I need to correct myself. All right. Being an entrepreneur, is often I say that it's a continuous learning cycle, right? It's a continuous learning cycle,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
along the way we do a lot of optimizations, and perhaps we are going towards the excellence. And how do you see your own journey in that regard?
Oh, I say entrepreneurship is like a roller coaster, and sometimes you want to get off because you're being sick, and other times it's really fun. And so those journeys, having good leadership around you is really important. And I have a great leadership team in our organization who will say, hey, Michelle, I think we're going the wrong way. Because sometimes as an entrepreneur, you become so focused on solving the problem that you forget to look up and just see what the surroundings are like. So I'm really lucky in that I have a great team who will call me out and be like, why are you going that way? Like, the pot of gold is here. I'm like, oh yeah. I was so busy head down, sort of butt up, trying to get things fixed that I forget to look up sometimes. So having good people around you, I think, is a big part of the entrepreneurship journey. And having great mentors around you too. It was really funny because during lockdown, so New Zealand locked down for 6 weeks, and I made a pact, which was every day I was going to call somebody amazing and ask them to mentor me for an hour, because I figured everybody was trapped at home and they had nothing else to do. And this would never happen in real life, but they all said yes. And so it was quite cool to have some really leading business people just sit on a Zoom call with me for an hour a day. Very different ones, giving me different perspectives on my business. And I didn't have to agree with them all, but it was good to have somebody else's, professional perspective on what I was doing and where I was going. And I think lockdown was a really good time to do things differently.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, we constantly evolve. Like you said, you had to go digital. It comes down to your mindset, right? You mentioned you are not a quitter, so you fight, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
fight, and then because you fight, and I mean there are chances that you succeed, right? If you don't give a fight,
Totally.
then you don't know. Like, so
But if
so
you fight too, there's chances that you fail. You have to be okay with knowing that you gave it your all and it still didn't work.
yes, yeah. I mean that's what is a learning, right? So you
Hmm.
did everything you could and you still fail. I
Hmm.
mean, you at least can say that, and I did everything I could, and I still failed,
Yeah.
right?
But those are
Um,
the harder fights, I think, to get back up from. I think for me, my digital platform was incredibly successful and we did really well. And so it's easy for me to say, and look, we pivoted and it was amazing. But, there have also been fights that everything died. So those are the ones that I think if you can get back up and try again, those are the ones that shape you.
in a different context, I was listening to you on a public speaking discourse at at a Microsoft Ignite conference,
Yeah.
where you talk about few interesting things, about the fear of yourself coming to the stage. And I found it interesting that where you sort of blend in science to overcome the biological fear.
Mm.
Can you explain me a little bit more in depth? How do
Sure.
I overcome that? Right? Yeah.
So look, we talked about diversity, and I think the other diversity I haven't mentioned is introversion versus being an extrovert. So I am an innate introvert. I am quite happy by myself, never talking to anybody ever. Like that is my natural state. However, as you know, entrepreneurs don't survive very well in that state.
No.
And most entrepreneurs who do well tend to be extroverts who might not know anything, but talk like they know about things. And so one of the things I realized I had to learn very quickly to be a successful entrepreneur is the art of public speaking and the art of communicating my ideas, being able to pitch well, being able to bring people with me. And so I'm an engineer. The only way I know how to solve problems is to engineer a solution. And so the solution is biological. My brain is wired not to be comfortable in these situations. So I did a lot of research into, well, why is my brain wired that way? And it's obviously because of our caveman days and it's flight or fright. And so I was like, okay, so how do I engineer myself to not fly every time and run away every time I have to do something in public, but actually fight? And so, yeah, I did a lot of sort of studying of biology and the innate responses of the human brain, especially around introverted brains, where our natural state is not to be the center of attention, not to be the one on stage, and sort of developed basically an algorithm for my own survival, I think, of being an entrepreneur in the public space, but also understanding what that meant. So for me, that means that I have to, being on stage or talking publicly physically drains me and emotionally drains me. And so I would always make sure that if I were to do that, there was, a half day afterwards that I would allow myself to go into a quiet room and rest. So being able to rejuvenate is a big part of my pattern. And also, I am a terrible public speaker if I've eaten because I vomit out of nerves. And so the other thing I learned very quickly is to not eat before I talk. And so learning how to hack your own systems, I think, is really important because sometimes you do have to go outside of your comfort zone. And so if you can figure out the things that help you do that, and for me, it's not eating and having some rest afterwards, then it helps you to grow in a space that you might not be comfortable in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you mentioned that perhaps introvert can be a better speaker. Like, why would you say that?
Oh my goodness, introverts are the best speakers as long as they get out there. I mean, Steve Jobs is a total introvert, right? And he's
Yeah.
one of the best speakers. And the reason being is introverts don't want to be there. So if they are there, it's because they have something to say and it's important. It's so important that they have gone out of their comfort zone to say it. And they know it's so important that they will prep and make sure it's perfect and thought through and have practiced it 100 times so it sounds perfect. And so introverts who are given the skills to understand how to speak in public, I think, make the best speakers because they do really think about what they're saying. And I can say this because my husband is an extrovert, right? And I watch him and he's like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, it doesn't matter. People are just listening to me. And he's very good at being on stage. He's very charismatic, but his content sometimes is not great. But he doesn't care because he's confident about being there. And he's like, well, people are listening to me. I must be amazing. And an introvert would never get up on stage just to talk. We only do that if there's something to say. And so I think we're much better speakers when given the skill set to know how to do this.
Okay. It's so the preparation part for introvert is the key. Is that what you're saying?
I always say, if you're a musician, you never do a stage performance of your big piano rectal having never seen the music before, right? You practice and you practice and you practice and you practice, and when you're good enough and you memorized it, then you go on stage. And I think the same should be done for introverts and public speaking. Don't expect that you're just going to go up on stage and talk. It doesn't work like that. There's so much work behind the scenes that a lot of people don't realize that happens so that when you see a talk, it's beautiful and it's really well done. It doesn't happen naturally. For some people it will, but very few people. For most of us, there's lots and lots of practice that's happened in between.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So being an entrepreneur, like I think there are certain moments like you feel like, okay, this is more challenging compared to others. Do you have any moments that you can identify? Okay, I don't want to be in those moments, and what are those moments?
Oh, I would never go back to real life. I love being an entrepreneur. Look, it's really hard, right? The financial insecurity is obviously really hard. And I guess I get really annoyed because, some of my friends are salaried and they come home and they're like, oh, it was so hard today, blah, blah. I'm not like, you don't know what hard is. Like,
Exactly.
you have no idea what it's like to have 12 people depend on you for money every day and your contract just felt like, so I struggle sometimes talking to what I call real life people, because I think unless you're an entrepreneur,
Real
you have
life
lots of,
people.
the people who have salaries and mortgages
9 to
and
5,
like,
right?
yeah. And they're like, oh, I had a hard day. I'm like, you have no idea what a hard day is. But no,
It looks like,
I mean, so that I find that perspective really hard. And so for me, having friends who are entrepreneurs is really important, because I think you need to find your people to just be able to express some of the challenges and bounce ideas off, because it's really hard to do that with somebody who's on a full-time salary and has a 9-to-5 job, because it's a very different risk analysis mode. So I would never want to work for anybody. I really like having control of my own destiny, and being responsible for those things. But it's definitely a huge amount of pressure to have other people's, livelihoods, feeding their children, their mortgages, relying on the decisions that you're making every day.
Now, in order to function as an entrepreneur, there must be a supporting system that keeps your dreams alive, right? So what can you say about your own supporting system?
Oh, I'm very lucky. So I have a husband who is also now the co-founder of my business, and we decided pretty quickly that he was going to join it, and we were going to do this crazy adventure together. So we've doubled the financial risk, but it's so much fun.
Wow.
Because it means that you can come home, what it means is your mission is the same. And so not everybody can work with their partner, but if you set some rules down, it does mean that when you're on a mission to change the world, and we're a social enterprise, our whole goal is to make positive impacts on the world. It's quite nice to come home and talk about the potential change that you've made as a couple. So I think that's really important. My friendship circle, a lot of them are entrepreneurs, and having that group is also really, really important. I think the other thing that's important for me is having some sort of balance. Look, balance for entrepreneurs is very different for balance for people with 9 to 5. But I mean, we never have an off switch. But for me, making sure that I have scheduled time to exercise every day in my day, and literally put it in my diary to make sure I make time for me. Make sure I've made time to cook a healthy meal and that I'm eating properly. Because otherwise you just work every hour because so much has to be done. And so having some rules around making sure that I have me time is important, as much as having friendships, to make sure that you're functioning at your top performance every day.
Yeah, and you don't have kids yet, I guess.
I don't have kids. So I mean that's a journey we've been on, right? So my husband and I have been struggling with infertility for 5 years. So in addition to all the challenges of
Oh,
entrepreneurship, we've had 5 miscarriages in 5 years, and the side of entrepreneurship and its ups and downs, I think, has prepared us for this crazy IVF journey that we have not been successful on, because you can't predict the future, and sometimes you try and put all your eggs in one basket and there's no eggs. So it's one of those things. But I think it's an important conversation to have about, sometimes people are balancing lots of things in their life as entrepreneurs, and that's work and life balance too.
mm-hmm. No, the reason why I asked is because with all the challenges you mentioned, I think adding kids would be a really good dimension to look at. When you have not slept overnight and you have to work throughout the day, it's a nice dimension just to let you know.
It's really interesting is a lot of my female entrepreneur friends all have children, and they all amazingly able to balance it and run these startups as well. So I think times have changed. I think I'm seeing women be literally superhumans in the ability to they all bring the babies to their meetings and stuff, which I think is becoming a new norm now.
Yeah,
But I think things are changing. I think things are more possible than they were before.
yeah. Especially when we are working from home, it has
Mm-hmm,
opened a lot of possibilities.
mm-hmm,
A lot of times, like we were using that physical meeting space, and now we don't have to. Not necessarily,
yeah.
even though we miss people, right? We miss the people's interaction and so forth. But definitely, it is possible to do everything that otherwise was thought impossible in the past. So, yeah.
I think that's a really important consideration too, is that, I mean, the world really has changed. And I think it took something like this, being locked down, for us to really commit to doing things remotely. I think we
Mhm,
talked about it before and said, oh, we could potentially have a video meeting, but never really did it. And
mhm,
suddenly we're forced to, and we see what works and what doesn't work. That I think now, you're more likely to have a video meeting than you would have been before, which is great for the work-life balance, I think, if you travel less.
mhm, mhm. I mean, I was talking to another entrepreneur. She's from Singapore, and she said, "Pramod, we were in a rush, right? So we were in a rush,
Mm-hmm,
and there were billionaires, and people are rushing towards being a trillionaires, and so forth.
mm-hmm.
And somehow the world is at a pause now, and we are trying to see what is more important to us, and we are trying to be more sensible towards that. And I guess maybe this sort of event was necessary for us to be able to be more sensible now. So,
I really think so. I think everybody's been forced to reflect on what their daily lives were. I mean, many people were commuting 2 or 3 hours a day as their normal, who suddenly got 2 or 3 hours back in their life every single day to tuck their kids into bed and to be with their partners. And for me, I know that I was traveling, as an entrepreneur, you're always trying to raise investment. And so I would jump on a plane and fly from New Zealand to California in a heartbeat just to have a meeting with a VC and then fly back. And that
yeah,
was totally normal for me.
yeah,
I probably wouldn't do that now. I think I've reset so much that I just wouldn't jump on a plane to go halfway around the world for a meeting.
yeah. And it's not even necessary, say in the first place.
Yeah, no, I agree now, but I think it took us to realize it wasn't necessary for us to realize it wasn't necessary. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think I'd have had the confidence before not to visit that VC because I'd have felt that they'd have thought I wasn't trying. But I think now we can really change the way that we behave.
Yeah, yeah. Um, if you look at the other technologies around, are there anything that you are quite excited about, other than what you are already engaged in? It can be anything like, I don't know,
Yeah,
blockchain
so
or.
I mean, I'm very interested in blockchain. I think it's fascinating, and I've been interested in it from early on. I'm interested in it for many reasons. One of its potentials, I do a lot of work with indigenous peoples and people in quite challenging communities where governments are not secure, for example. And I think blockchain has the potential to really make an impact in those communities too, around land ownership and keeping ledgers of property and other things. And the thing that I'm building right now is an artificially intelligent, emotionally intelligent human, which I'm quite interested in. There's a New Zealand company called Soul Machines, and we've partnered. And I'm trying to make education in a way that you can basically have an artificial intelligent digital human inside your pocket. And anytime you have a science question or you need help with your science or your maths homework, you can pull it out and chat to it as if it's a human. And the thing I love about emotionally intelligent artificial intelligence systems is that they have facial recognition on them. So they use your webcam to look at your face when you ask a question. And then they respond based on how they perceive you are feeling. So if you're confused, they might go, oh, I'm sorry, that was too hard. Let me try and explain it in a different way. If you
Oh.
look cross, they might be like, oh, you hate this subject. Let's play a game or do something different.
Mhm.
And I think, when we talk about advantages of some students, it's many students who come from privileged backgrounds have tutors. I know I didn't know that until I was much older, but I'd have probably done much better at school if I had a tutor. And so what I'm trying to do is democratize the tutor system and build a digital human that can help you with your homework that you don't have to pay for as you would a tutor. but that was also empathetic to your needs as a student, to know when you're being pushed too much and to just, yeah, take a step back. So that's what I'm interested in right now, is the future of education and digital humans.
You mentioned you are working on AI-enabled device, or is it going to be on more of a mobile app, or it's going to be
Yeah.
embedded? Yeah.
So it can be whatever, as long as you've got an internet system. So we're building it now to perform both on web and on a mobile app. And we're just sort of prototyping it, because young people use their devices very different than us old people. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's easy to build something for us, but actually a lot of young people are so native to technologies that the way they use it is very differently. So we've spent a lot of time studying young students, so teenagers in high school, and how they interact with their devices, but also how they seek help for their homework, and also how they interact with real life tutors. And we're trying to create something that fits the way that they interact with the world, which is quite different to how we would go Google it.
Yeah, I'll tell you something funny. You know, I think I've repeated this to many people already, but it's still fresh. You know, I have a 11-year-old daughter, and last year she asked me, Dad, when you were 10, what was the iPhone version? So,
Yeah.
so I said to her, like, when I was 10, we were just listening to radio, and that used to be our awesome time, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, and now, you know, as they are growing up, they have, you know, all these tools accessible to them, and then they see the world in a different way compared to us,
Yes.
you know.
And so when you're an entrepreneur, you have to remember who your customer base is. And I think that's a really important thing. You and I, because we grew up without the internet ever existing, we use our keyboards, right? We tap and we type
Yeah,
because that's what
yeah,
we've brought up with. If
yeah.
you look at young people now, they're all about voice. Everything's about voice recognition, and whether it's Siri or Google Home or Alexa, they are very good at conversing with their digital, whatever it is, device. And so they learn how to speak differently, so that, you know, natural language programming is a big part, I think, of the future of technology, because this generation are so used to not using a keyboard and using their voice instead. And so as an entrepreneur, I have to make sure that I understand how the customers would want to interact with something versus how I would want to interact with something, which, as an old person, I'm not that old, but I'm ancient when it comes to young people.
I say that to my daughter as well.
But we're so ancient to them.
Yeah.
Actually, we have to remember as entrepreneurs that our customer base actually interacts with technology very differently than we would innately do, because we've had to learn, you know, lots of different ways as technology has moved on with us.
I'm a little bit more intrigued by blockchain because of the possibility that it offers, you know, especially with, you know, identifications or maybe tracing. How do you see this being useful, you know, in other sectors other than the currencies? You know, how do you see this
Yeah.
being very useful? Yeah.
So look, back in 2011, I hacked a laptop to be able to do mining. So I was part of that early group
Yeah.
who
You could do that. You
mined.
could still do that.
I mined
But
Bitcoin on a laptop. You can't do that now. You need a
no,
whole
no, no.
server system. But so I've been interested in that blockchain world for a while. But again, because I do a lot of work here with Indigenous groups, I'm very interested in it from a couple of perspectives. One is I've been helping a New Zealand Māori company who they fish sustainably. And their fish is, you know, sent all over the world. But one of the markets they go to is China. And one of the challenges in China is food security. So having trust in the fact that the food says it is what it says it is, and that you know where it's come from. And so we're able to actually use blockchain so that there's a video camera on top of the fishing boat, so that you could track, finally in China with a QR code, every single point that was logged on the blockchain of where this fish had come from, where it came ashore, where it was then processed, how long it took to get across, you know, the ocean, and then how long it had been in China before it came to you. And I think issues around food security and understanding where things come from is a really easy way that blockchain has a solution. As well as I said before, in those countries where governments may not have, you know, there may be some corruption in the government, being able to make sure that people's land is allocated in a way and tracked in a way that it can't be changed.
I mean, there's a lot of applications these days, where blockchain is applied. I mean, on a real use cases. So even I'm quite intrigued, and especially with the way the banking sector is evolving towards the adoption of various digital currencies. I mean, I find the fintech industry a little bit more, let's say, dominated by the new way of thinking as far as the offerings are concerned. So I don't know what you think about the whole evolution within the financial space.
Look, I do you remember we used to write checks with
I do.
paper?
I perfectly. And then
Like,
stand on the queue, and
and
then
stand in the queue, right? And
yeah,
then have to cash it, and it would take 5 days to clear. We are
yeah,
of that generation
yeah.
where banking was so different. And now you can pay wave, right? Now you can wave a piece of plastic over something and it magically pays for it. So I think even we have been through a transition that perhaps we forget.
Hmm.
And the next generation is so much quicker at adopting and trusting technology that I think, right now, while we still have our big capitalist system of, well, the big banks own things and this is the way it's always been and it's going to be government controlled, sure, there'll be resistance to change, but I think decentralization is a really interesting concept. And if you look at young people, they don't own anything, right? Everything's
Hmm.
decentralized. They're so accepting of this type of landscape that I think, again, we're going to be the old ones who are like, oh, I need my physical plastic card. And they're just going, I don't know what you're talking about. I just transferred money between here and Timbuktu and it took no time and I didn't have to pay a fee. So
Yeah.
I think it's not going to be us that makes that change. I think the next generation, who again are digital natives and haven't grown up around this big construct of banking and who owns it and the financial regulation agencies, I think they're going to be more open. And remember, currency is a figment of our imagination,
Yeah.
right? I mean, cavemen didn't have
No.
banknotes. We invented banknotes to mean something to us. And so we can change what that meaning means and we can give value to whatever we like as humans. It's up to us. So that's where I think digital currencies become really interesting. It's just about how many people believe.
Hmm. Yeah, and I was one of those the person like who onboarded into the Bitcoin bandwagon bit maybe later on. But maybe later on, I couldn't understand the currency at when it was sort of up and coming,
Mhm.
and all my friends, like at least who knew about it, they invested and they did pretty well, I guess.
Mhm.
But then I was one of those adopter, like maybe later on towards like it actually took the spike, so um, yeah, and but I'm still curious about the whole industry, and I happened to talk to one of the Australian BTC exchange, CEO as well, last
Mhm.
month. So I'm quite interested in that particular sector, that because the way things are going on, at least in the currency market, something has to change, something has to dramatically change, so that there is a trace of everything that we do over the internet, and also everything is traceable, right? So it's very important that we start to become more transparent. Yeah.
I totally agree. And, I mean, it's kind of like the MySpace versus the Facebook.
Yeah.
Bitcoin was the MySpace, right? And everybody threw in all their money to this thing that was going to be better than gold. And Bitcoin's had some chat. And then Ethereum came up and it was like,
Yeah.
oh, it's all Ethereum, right? It's
Yeah.
not about throwing all your money into one thing. It's about sitting back and looking at the system and
Yeah.
going, are other humans going to buy into this system? Because if they are, this is what's going to work. And it might not be one currency, it might be multiple cryptocurrencies that do different things. But I think as more and more people learn about it, and I think one of the biggest challenges around cryptocurrencies is the majority of people on the street just don't even know it exists and don't know how it works and don't think it's legal and all of the other things. So until you have education of the public to actually not just let it be the tech bros in Silicon Valley who are talking about, oh yeah, I've got all of these coins. Actually, if you break it down to the public, I think more people are more likely to think about it and try it. I still think it's quite exclusive in who uses it and who understands how to get access to it.
Maybe we are talking in jargons, right? So because it's very difficult to explain people about the concept of digital currency. if I have to explain this to my dad, perhaps he would not never buy that, right? So,
Yeah.
so maybe there is a simpler way to explain people about the technologies that is available,
People only care about themselves, right? People want to know, does this help me? Is it going to make me richer? Is it going to save me money? Is it going to be quicker? And so if you can explain it in those ways, people will listen. If you start talking about mining and servers and like everybody turns off. And so I don't think that blockchain has been very sexy in how it's been
No,
marketed.
no.
And I think that's part of the challenge around it.
More devices that we connect to the internet, it means like, we are using some amount of power, right? So I think using the mining is a pure example of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, they say that data is the new oil, and I think it really is. So if you look at all of the IoT or Internet of Things devices that are being connected to pretty much everything, the amount of data transferred, and with 5G now, the speed that is transferred is a world apart from even 10 years ago. I think when it comes to blockchain, there are some companies who are really leading the way into making sure that their mining is more sustainable. So, making sure that they're setting up mining areas I know the Bitfury guys in Georgia are working on very, really changing the technology around making sure it's renewable power and making sure that although they are using a lot of power, it's coming from a renewable source. And I think we're going to start to have those conversations around where is our power coming from? How do we do that? And I live in New Zealand where we're pretty much all renewable power, so we don't have to worry about it. And so, it's one of the advantages of living in paradise. But I do think that some of the being
now
trapped
you're
in
insulting
paradise,
us, right?
Yeah. No, but I do think the countries that will thrive are the ones who will have, investment in renewable energy systems, because that's where startups are going to want to go to feel like not only are they looking at blockchain, but also they're thinking about it in a sustainable manner. And I think when the blockchain conversation started, it was all about how do we do this as quickly as possible. But now looking at how much energy is being consumed, I think the next conversation is how do we do this as quickly as possible and as sustainability aware as possible. And I think that's the next level of where blockchain is. And I think when it comes to IoTs, there's a lot of new work around low data IoTs. And so I think the technology around Internet of Things will also change to be much lower bandwidth of data, because you don't need to be collecting all of these things and putting them up all of the time. So I think as we started this, it was like, yeah, let's do all of the things. And then as always happens when you get overexcited, like, oh, we did all of the things. We don't need all of these things. So I think we'll scale back a little bit to actually figure out what we actually do need. But I think, as humans, we're innately built to just build everything as fast as you can and then go, oh, we don't need most of these things. And what do we scale back on?
It's similar to the things that you shop, right? You buy everything from Amazon, and then you realize most of the things that you don't need at all, right? So
yeah, that's why you should never go to the supermarket hungry.
Yeah, that's a good way to think. Like,
how did all this candy end up in my basket? I don't know what happened.
Yeah, and in a different context, I'm looking at the way, at least pre-COVID situation, right? And maybe at least a few years back, I've been always fascinated by the way the workspace has been evolving so far, right? We used to see a very homogeneous culture, in a workspace, but now we see a little bit more diverse, and we see more heterogeneous culture within the workspace, where different ideas are welcome, different views are accepted. How do you see the future workspace now, given the context that we are at? Of course, there might be a different world post-COVID, and we might find vaccine and so forth, But still, I think, let's say a year or 2 years from now, how do you see the workspace?
Yeah, look, I think you're lucky if you're seeing more. I think because I work for engineering companies, it's still quite traditional in its workspace. And look, one of the things I did when I built a business, I wanted to build a business that I would want to work for. And so I took a lot of the challenges that I had found in my 20-year career as an engineer, and I just said, right, these don't make any sense. I'm getting rid of them. So one of the things that I struggled with is forcing somebody to come to an office. So my company is remote first and flexi time. So if you don't want to come to the office, you don't have to. You can work from wherever you want, whenever you want, because I trust you. And I think that's a really interesting concept that has now come out of COVID, is people are learning that they can start to work from anywhere. The second thing is, as an introverted leader, meetings were never built for people like me. So here's what would happen. I would go into a meeting and then I'd suddenly find out what the meeting was about by a loud person in the room. And then that loud person would go, I've got an idea. And then another loud person go, that's a great idea. And they'd go, agreed, we've all agreed. And then we'd leave the meeting and we would do that idea.
Yeah.
Now, as an introvert, I need time to think about the idea. And then I need space to be able to come up with a solution. And then I'm not going to shout out my answer. I'm going to think about it really carefully, probably over 24 hours before I have a solution. And so what I found working in a lot of companies is we would often go in the wrong direction because two loud people agreed with each other about something that nobody else really knew what we were talking about. And that's the way the company went. And I really wanted to empower the introverts in the room to actually have reflective time. And I think sort of as we're working from home, we're allowing more space for this thought process, because it's not you have more time between meetings, but also it's not always the loud. You can put people on mute, right? So sometimes when somebody is being the loud person on mute, you can mute them, which you couldn't do in a real meeting. And I think in muting them, you suddenly become more aware, because you can now see everybody's face on a call. You become aware of who isn't speaking. And I think a great leader now is able to pull them out of their shell and say, hey, what do you think about this? And I think it's a very different dynamic. So I'm really excited about what post-COVID world looks like. And hopefully it allows more people to have ideas and be able to speak in a way that we just ran meetings horribly before COVID. We were just, we just did meetings just to have meetings sometimes.
Yeah. Let's have a chat. And it used to be that kind of meeting where it never had any objective, so.
Yeah. And then somebody would decide something. You're like, oh, the whole company has turned because some two people had a chat. Like, what are we doing? Where is the strategy? And then if you miss that meeting, you're like, oh, what are we doing? Oh, Bob said we should do this. Okay, we're all doing this because Bob was loud and everybody agrees with Bob. So yeah. It's quite, I hope it's going to give us a bit more time to reflect before we make decisions.
Yeah. So you muted
and you can't just call a random
people.
Oh, I've muted. Yeah, I mute people all the time. That's the power of being like the host of a Zoom meeting, right? Often like, oh, are you on mute? Oh, that's odd. I don't understand why that is. I've done that more than once.
I hope people are listening to you now.
I hope
not. So what's the dream?
Oh, look, I have some pretty bold dreams. My dream is to empower everybody, especially young people, to realize that they can be creators, not just consumers of technology. And I don't think all of our young people grow up thinking that they can be creators or inventors. And so, my big goal is to have those conversations with young people and then help guide them on their way and their journey to, help solve whatever problems that they want to solve. But for many people who grow up in areas of challenge, to actually solve some of the problems that they see every day and realize and empower them to realize that they actually probably hold the solution just as well as somebody else who is different than them coming in to tell them how to do things. So pretty audacious goals, but that's what I want to do.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, at this time, anything that you can do, staying home or making a difference, I think this is already great, So I want to sort of, really comment on the things that you are doing,
Thank you. I have a goal. Okay, I have a goal. You have an 11-year-old daughter. I would love for your 11-year-old daughter, if I said to her, do you think you're an engineer? I would love for her to say, of course, I make stuff. That totally makes me an engineer.
Yeah.
And for her to have that confidence to use that word and realize that if she's ever made anything in her life, then she's used engineering skills and therefore she can associate that word with herself. Whether or not she wants to do that as a career, I don't mind. But I'd love the mindset of our young women to realize that they are creators and engineers and it is a word for them.
Interesting. I'm definitely going to share your video with her, just for her to sort of, work harder.
Work smarter, not harder,
No,
work
no,
smarter.
yeah, I think she needs to do both.
Yeah. But the thing is, right, when you're an entrepreneur, if you are
Yeah,
passionate about what you do, you don't think you're working hard, right? Because you do what you love every day. And so the work harder thing is interesting because I don't see what I do as work because it
yeah,
brings me so much joy every day. But I'm definitely doing my life mission. And
yeah.
so, yeah, I work hard, but I don't feel like it's work.
You said it's something interesting. Indeed, even if I reflect myself, working let's say 10 to 12 hours every single day, I don't feel like, I'm doing too much, right? In my mind, I'm just doing a regular work.
Mhm.
But from my wife and from my kids, like they are like, okay, maybe you've worked quite a long hours today, yeah,
But you don't notice because you're in your flow and you love what you do. And it's only when you talk to somebody who has a salary job and you're like, oh,
yeah.
I just did a 12-hour day. They're like, what? Did you get overtime? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, that's right. You guys count your hours. Like, I just
Yeah,
love what I do. I feel really
yeah,
privileged to be in a position where I get to
yeah.
do what I love every day.
Working 9 to 5 is it's different world. Like you said
Mm-hmm.
before, those people or something you referred the term before. I forgot.
It's probably those people. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Those
don't know,
normal
something.
people.
Yeah, those normal people. Yeah, normal people. You said something like
Yeah.
that. It's different, right?
Yeah.
So it's a
It's
different way
different.
to think, and it's a different way to sort of make a difference. And you just have one life that you are aware of, so
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you have to make the best out of it, right? So
Totally. And don't waste it. I mean, life is so short and, sure you can go work for somebody else and get a salary and buy your things, but I'm all about a life filled with stories and adventures. And so I think that's what the life of an entrepreneur is like. And yeah, it's lonely sometimes. And yes, it's elating sometimes. And I'd rather have highs and lows than just a static line.
it was an interesting conversation. I definitely I believe that it was a very interesting conversation. I get to know you slightly more, other than just listening to you through the videos and so forth. I have a lot of admiration for the work that you're doing. I would like to think that you would be doing this for quite some time from now onwards as well. I would like to even talk to you next year, hopefully, when the COVID is over. Fingers crossed.
Hopefully, I might
And
be able to make it to Europe next year.
yeah,
That's what I'm hoping. I
absolutely,
don't even.
absolutely.
And we
So
could do this in
pessimistic, yeah.
person.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It would be nice. It would be nice.
But if we
And
do that, I'm going to meet your daughter and ask her if she's an engineer.
absolutely,
So you've got a year
absolutely.
to work on that.
And thank you very much. Once again, thanks for making this time to talk to me.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time, and I'll let you know where we're at in a year.